A broken soul in the wreckage. Kara lay sprawled among the broken remains of her ship, her breath shallow and her vision blurry. The crash had been brutal, tearing apart the sleek vessel that once carried her through the stars. Now, all that was left were smoking wreckage, broken panels, and jagged pieces of metal scattered across the barren land. Pain shot through her body, her left arm twisted at an unnatural angle, while deep cuts along her side bled freely. Her once pristine silver armor was charred and cracked, offering little protection against the cold wind that howled through the wasteland. She clenched her teeth and tried to sit up, but her strength was gone. Kara's people were warriors, known for their resilience, yet in this moment, she felt fragile, weak. The mission was already a failure. Her people would never know what had happened to her, and the secret she carried would die with her. As the darkness threatened to claim her, a sound cut through the stillness, a faint crunching of boots against gravel. Her sharp ears picked it up immediately, adrenaline surging despite her injuries. Someone, or something, was coming. Her heart pounded. Was it a scavenger drawn by the wreck, a predator from this strange world, or perhaps a tracker sent to finish her off? Kara's hand instinctively moved toward the hilt of her blade, but her fingers barely twitched. She was too weak to fight. If this was the end, she would face it as a warrior should, eyes open, with no fear. The footsteps grew louder, more deliberate, and then stopped. Kara squinted, her alien vision sharpening just enough to make out a figure standing at the edge of the wreckage. It was tall and humanoid, wrapped in dark clothing, with a strange helmet covering its face. A weapon? No, something else. A bag slung over its shoulder. The figure approached cautiously, stepping over debris with a careful grace. Kara's breath quickened. The being stopped a few feet away, then crouched down, leaning closer. Now she could see its face, a human male. His features were sharp, his eyes an earthy brown, and his expression unreadable. Humans. The stories she had heard of them weren't kind, dangerous, unpredictable, selfish. Why was he here? Was he a threat? Kara tried to lift her blade again, but it slipped from her grasp. The human noticed and held up his hands in a gesture she didn't recognize but instinctively understood. Peace. Slowly, he pulled a small device from his bag. It was a medical scanner, projecting soft green light as it hovered over her body. Kara's instincts screamed to push him away, but her body refused to obey. He frowned at the scanner's results and then rummaged through his bag, pulling out small containers and tools she didn't recognize. The human knelt beside her, his movements deliberate and precise. He muttered something under his breath, the words soft and unfamiliar. His tone wasn't threatening. It was concerned. Kara's breath hitched as he gently touched her injured arm, examining the break. The pain made her flinch, and the human paused, looking into her eyes. "Easy," he said softly, his tone calm and soothing. She didn't understand the word, but the intention was clear. This wasn't a warrior. This was a healer. Kara's thoughts raced. Why would a human help her? Did he want something in return? Her people had warned her about humans' greed, how they valued wealth over life. But this one wasn't searching her wreck for valuables. He wasn't ignoring her suffering. Instead, he was carefully cleaning her wounds, his touch steady despite the grim situation. Her gaze remained fixed on his face. She saw no malice there, only determination. The human worked quickly, wrapping her arm in a splint made from his supplies. Each action was efficient, purposeful. When he finished, he sat back on his heels and sighed, wiping sweat from his brow. Kara tried to speak, but her voice came out in a weak rasp. She didn't know if he could understand her language, and it didn't matter. She couldn't form the words anyway. Her strength was fading fast. The human seemed to notice. He leaned closer, his expression softening. "Stay with me," he said, his voice low but firm. Again, she didn't understand the words, but the tone carried through. He wasn't leaving her. Not yet. The last thing Kara saw before her eyes closed was the human lifting her gently, cradling her broken body as if it were fragile glass. She didn't know why he had come, or what he intended, but for the first time since the crash, Kara felt a flicker of something she thought she'd lost forever. Hope. The human medic's gamble. John adjusted Kara's weight in his arms, gritting his teeth as he carried her away from the crash site. The alien woman was light, too light, as though her body had already given up on survival. Her silver armor glinted under the pale sunlight, and her features, though unfamiliar, were delicate and filled with pain. He glanced down at her face, her eyes fluttering shut as she drifted in and out of consciousness. "She's not going to last long like this," John muttered to himself. The crash site was no place to linger. Smoke still billowed into the sky, a beacon for scavengers, mercenaries, and worse. John's experience in these lawless zones taught him one thing: stay too long, and someone will find you. And in Kara's condition, they wouldn't stand a chance. Every step away from the wreckage felt like a gamble. He had no idea what he was dealing with. She wasn't human. That much was obvious. Her physiology was unlike anything he'd treated before, and his medkit wasn't built for alien biology. Yet he couldn't leave her there. The moment he'd seen her struggling to breathe, her life slipping away, something deep inside him refused to walk away. They reached a small ridge, and John lowered her carefully onto a patch of grass beneath the shade of a twisted tree. His hands moved quickly, retrieving his scanner from his pack. He didn't need a second opinion. Her condition was critical. The scanner's holographic display flickered, showing erratic readings that made no sense. Elevated temperature, low blood pressure, internal bleeding, none of it aligned with human standards. "Damn it," John cursed under his breath. He rubbed the back of his neck, thinking fast. What little information the scanner could provide wasn't enough to save her. He'd have to rely on his instincts and whatever medical skills he could adapt on the fly. Kara stirred weakly, her lips moving as if to speak, but no sound came out. Her alien eyes opened halfway, the vibrant gold in them dull and clouded. She looked at him, her gaze filled with fear and confusion, yet there was a flicker of recognition. John knelt beside her, speaking softly. "I don't know if you can understand me, but I'm going to help you. Just hold on, all right?" She didn't respond, but her breathing steadied, almost as if she trusted him. John frowned, the weight of the situation pressing down on him. He'd patched up plenty of injuries in the field before. Soldiers, scavengers, even kids who got caught in crossfire. But this was different. The stakes felt higher. Saving her felt important, even if he couldn't explain why. As he worked, the wind shifted, carrying with it a distant hum, a sound he recognized all too well. "Search drones." "Great," John muttered, glancing over his shoulder. He couldn't see them yet, but they were close. If they found the wreckage, it wouldn't take long for them to track his trail. Whoever sent those drones wasn't looking for survivors. They'd be looking for something valuable. And Kara, she might just be their target. John's mind raced. He needed to move her again, but she wouldn't survive if he pushed too hard. He scanned the area, spotting a narrow path leading down the ridge to a hidden thicket. It wasn't perfect, but it would give them cover for now. He crouched beside Kara, his voice firm yet gentle. "I'm going to carry you again. We have to keep moving. You're going to make it. I promise." As he lifted her, Kara's eyes opened briefly, her gaze locking onto his. Her lips moved, and this time, a faint whisper emerged. "Why? Help. Me." The words were broken but clear. John hesitated, caught off guard. He hadn't expected her to speak, let alone in a language he could understand. Her question hung in the air, heavy with meaning. Why was he helping her? He didn't know the answer himself. Maybe it was instinct, or maybe it was the haunted look in her eyes, one he recognized too well. He'd seen it in the mirror after losing too many people he couldn't save. "Because I can," John said simply, his voice steady. and because you deserve a chance." Kara's eyes closed again, her expression softening as if his words brought her some comfort. John adjusted her in his arms and started down the path, the hum of the drones growing louder behind them. Every step was a risk, but giving up wasn't an option. As they reached the thicket, John set Kara down against a tree, his ears straining to catch any sign of pursuit. The drones were close, but they hadn't spotted them yet. He worked quickly, using foliage to camouflage their position. Kara's breathing was shallow, her skin pale and clammy. She was slipping away, and he was running out of time. "I need you to hang on," John said, kneeling beside her. He placed a hand on her shoulder, his voice low but firm. "You're stronger than this. I know you are." Kara didn't respond, but a faint tremor passed through her hand, as if she was trying to reach for him. John's jaw tightened. He had to figure out how to stabilize her, how to buy them both more time. And he had to do it fast, because the drones weren't the only danger out there, and Kara's secrets might just get them both killed. Escape into the unknown. John's boots crunched against the uneven terrain as he carried Kara through the dense forest. His arms burned from the effort, but he couldn't stop. Not yet. The hum of search drones in the distance kept him on edge. The wreckage was far behind them now, but he knew it wouldn't take long for whoever sent the drones to expand their search radius. Kara remained motionless in his arms, her breathing faint. She was getting worse. He'd done his best to patch her up, but her alien physiology was a puzzle he couldn't solve with the limited tools in his medkit. "Hang in there," he muttered, his voice more for himself than for her. Just a little further. The forest began to thicken, the towering trees casting long shadows over the uneven ground. John scanned the area, looking for anything that might offer shelter. His eyes landed on a rocky outcrop ahead, half hidden by vines and undergrowth. It wasn't much, but it would have to do. He pushed through the foliage, his heart pounding. The outcrop formed a shallow cave, just big enough for two people to fit inside. He set Kara down gently, her head resting on his rolled-up jacket. Her face was pale, her once vibrant golden eyes dull and barely open. "I'll be right back," he said softly, as though she could understand him. He stepped outside, gathering branches and leaves to cover the entrance. The makeshift camouflage wouldn't hold up to a thorough search, but it might buy them time. When he returned, Kara's eyes were open, though unfocused. Her lips moved, forming words too faint for him to hear. John crouched beside her, leaning in. "What is it? What are you trying to say?" Her voice came out in a weak rasp. "You leave me." John shook his head firmly. "Not a chance. I didn't drag you all this way just to abandon you now." Kara's fingers twitched, her hand moving slightly toward him. "Danger for you." John frowned, understanding the meaning behind her broken words. "I know it's dangerous," he said, "but I'm not leaving you behind. So stop worrying about me and focus on staying alive." Kara's eyes closed again, her face relaxing slightly. John exhaled, running a hand through his sweat-damp hair. He leaned back against the cave wall, trying to plan his next move. The forest was vast, but it wouldn't keep them hidden forever. They needed a better plan, and fast. Suddenly, a sharp metallic sound echoed through the trees. John froze, his muscles tensing. The drones were closer now, their hum growing louder. He grabbed his pistol, the weight of the old weapon feeling heavier than usual. It wouldn't do much against advanced tech, but it was better than nothing. He peeked out of the camouflaged entrance, scanning the forest for movement. The glowing red eyes of a search drone glided between the trees, its sleek frame hovering silently. John's stomach tightened. It was too close. Kara stirred behind him, letting out a faint groan. The noise was soft, but in the stillness of the forest, it might as well have been a shout. The drone's sensors flared, its red eyes locking onto the cave. A high-pitched beep filled the air as it floated closer. "Damn it," John muttered. He pulled his pistol, taking aim. His breath slowed, his focus narrowing on the drone. One shot. That's all he'd get. The drone darted closer, its sleek body glinting in the dappled sunlight. John waited, his finger tightening on the trigger. As it reached the edge of the camouflage, he fired. The bullet struck the drone's sensor array, sending it spiraling into the ground with a loud crash. The explosion of sparks lit up the forest floor, and John's heart sank. The noise would draw more attention. He turned back to Kara, who was watching him with weak but alert eyes. "We need to move," he said, grabbing his pack and slinging it over his shoulder. He crouched down, slipping one arm under Kara's knees and the other behind her back. She let out a soft sound of protest, but she didn't resist as he lifted her again. They moved deeper into the forest, John pushing through branches and overgrowth, his pulse racing. He didn't know where they were going, only that they had to get far away from the wreckage and the drones. After what felt like hours, the forest opened up into a small clearing. In the center stood an ancient structure, overgrown with vines and moss. It looked like a ruin, the kind of place scavengers avoided because it offered nothing of value. To John, it looked like salvation. He carried Kara inside, setting her down on a stone platform. The air was cooler here, the thick walls blocking out the sound of the drones. For the first time in hours, John allowed himself to breathe. Kara's eyes opened slightly, her gaze meeting his. "Safe," she whispered. "For now," John replied, kneeling beside her. "But we can't stay here forever. You're still in bad shape, and we've got company out there." Kara's hand reached weakly for his, her touch surprisingly warm. "Thank you," she said, her voice barely audible. John shook his head, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "Don't thank me yet. We're not out of the woods." As he spoke, a distant roar echoed through the forest, the sound of engines growing louder. John's smile faded. Whoever was after them wasn't giving up, and the real danger was only beginning. Bonds forged in the dark. The moonlight filtered through the cracks in the stone ceiling, casting long, eerie shadows over the ancient ruin. John sat with his back against the cool, weathered stone wall, staring into the darkened corners of the abandoned structure. Kara lay beside him, her breath steady but shallow, her once bright eyes clouded with pain and exhaustion. The soft rustling of the wind outside was the only sound that kept them company in the stillness. John didn't know how much longer they could hide here. The distant engines still echoed through the night, a reminder that their enemies were closing in. The drones would be back soon. He had to get her out of here, but where could they go? The forest around them seemed endless, and no matter where they ran, they would never be truly safe. He glanced down at Kara, her alien features pale in the dim light. There was so much he didn't know about her, about why she was here, what her mission had been, or what the people who pursued her wanted. All he knew was that she had risked everything to get here, and now he had to make sure she didn't die because of it. "Hey," he whispered, his voice soft as he leaned over her. "How are you holding up?" Kara's eyes fluttered open at the sound of his voice, but it took her a moment to focus. When she did, she stared up at him, the faintest hint of recognition in her gaze. Her lips parted, as if trying to say something, but no words came. She raised a trembling hand, her fingers brushing against his arm. It was the first time she had touched him willingly. John wasn't sure if she was conscious enough to understand him, but he spoke anyway. "I'm not going to leave you. We'll figure this out, okay?" Kara's gaze locked onto his, and for a moment, it felt as though the world around them faded. The weight of their situation was heavy, but in that quiet moment, there was something else, something John hadn't expected. It was a quiet understanding, a shared bond that transcended language. Her lips moved again, and this time, her voice was barely a whisper. I never wanted this. I never wanted to be a target." John nodded slowly, his heart aching with the words she didn't even have to say. He had seen the pain in her eyes since the moment he'd found her. Whatever had happened to her, it had torn her apart. And yet, despite everything, she still held on. She hadn't given up, even when the odds were against her. "It's not your fault," he said softly, placing a hand gently on hers. "We're just two people caught in something bigger than us, but I'm not giving up on you." Kara's fingers tightened around his hand, and for a brief moment, John felt the weight of that simple gesture. She was scared, but she was strong. Stronger than he could have ever imagined. Suddenly, there was a low, distant rumble. John's heart skipped a beat. The engines were closer now, and the unmistakable sound of boots crunching on the forest floor carried through the walls of the ruin. Someone was coming. "We have to go," John said, his voice urgent. He helped Kara sit up, her body trembling as she tried to regain some strength. Her once pristine armor was now a battered, broken shell of what it had been, and her face was pale, drawn with exhaustion. But there was still fire in her eyes. "I can't." Kara's voice faltered. She struggled to lift herself, her hand slipping from John's grip. "I'm not strong enough." "You don't have to be," John said quickly, crouching down beside her. "I'll carry you. We just need to get to the other side of the ridge. I have a plan. Just trust me." She didn't answer, but the look in her eyes told him everything he needed to know. She trusted him. At least, she trusted him enough to not let go. John lifted her once more, her body feeling even lighter than before. But this time, it wasn't just the weight of her body he felt. It was the weight of their bond. They weren't just two strangers anymore. They had become something else, something beyond the roles they were supposed to play. In the dark, with the world outside pressing in, they had become allies, survivors. They moved quickly, John pushing through the dense underbrush, his breath coming in heavy gasps. Kara's face was pressed against his chest, her body weak against his, but she didn't protest. She had become a part of his mission, just as he had become a part of hers. As they reached the ridge, John paused to catch his breath. The sounds of pursuit were closer now, the hunters drawing near. He could almost feel their presence like a weight in the air, suffocating and relentless. "Hang on," John muttered, shifting Kara in his arms to give her more support. "We're almost there." Suddenly, a sharp sound echoed through the forest, something whistling through the air, followed by a deafening thud. The ground shook beneath their feet, and John instinctively dropped to the ground, shielding Kara with his body. "What the hell was that?" John whispered, his heart pounding in his chest. The sound of engines was gone, replaced by the crackle of static over a hidden speaker. Kara's eyes widened, her body stiffening in his arms. "It's them. They found us." John's eyes darted around, trying to make sense of the noise, the vibrations, the feeling of dread that filled the air. There was something different about this hunt, something far more dangerous than anything he had encountered before. And in that moment, he realized that it wasn't just Kara they were after. It was something bigger. Kara pulled away from him slightly, her hand reaching into her armor, where a hidden compartment lay. She pulled out a small device, no bigger than the palm of her hand. It was sleek, metallic, and glowing faintly with an otherworldly light. "They want this," Kara whispered. "This is why they're hunting me." John's eyes widened. "What is it?" Kara didn't answer immediately. Instead, she turned her gaze to the dark forest surrounding them, her face filled with a mixture of fear and determination. She knew they had little time. Whatever this device was, it was more than just a piece of technology. It was the key to something. But what? "They won't stop until they have it," she said quietly, her voice resolute. "And they won't stop until they have me." John didn't know how much longer they had before the hunters arrived, but one thing was clear. They were caught in something far bigger than they had ever imagined. And now, Kara's past was about to catch up with them both. The hunter arrives. The quiet was shattered by the sound of heavy boots crunching on the underbrush, followed by the unmistakable hum of high-tech engines hovering just above the forest floor. John's heart raced as he crouched in the shadows, pressing Kara back into the safety of the dense foliage. The light from the approaching search vehicle flickered through the trees, casting long, jagged shadows against the ground. "We don't have much time," John whispered, his breath coming in short, controlled bursts. He tightened his grip on his pistol, the cold metal feeling almost foreign in his hand. It had been years since he used a weapon in a real fight, and he wasn't sure how much he could rely on his rusty skills now. Kara's eyes were wide, a mixture of fear and resignation. She had seen hunters like this before, hunters who would stop at nothing to capture her, no matter the cost. "I know them," she said softly, her voice trembling with a hint of something John couldn't place. "I've faced them before. They are relentless." John looked down at her, the weight of the situation settling on his shoulders. The hunters who tracked Kara weren't just any mercenaries. They were elite bounty hunters, and they'd been trained to deal with any situation. They had advanced tech at their disposal, and they knew how to use it. But more than that, they had no regard for life. Kara wasn't just another bounty. She was something far more valuable. "We have to stop them here," John said, his voice firm. "If they get any closer, we're done for." Kara gave a small nod, her fingers brushing against the device she had been clutching since they had first escaped the wreckage. It pulsed faintly with a strange, otherworldly energy, but Kara's grip on it seemed to waver, as if she were fighting a battle within herself. John followed her gaze toward the approaching hunters. He could see the shadows of armored figures through the trees, their silhouettes flickering as the vehicle moved closer. They were circling the area, methodical in their search. A low voice crackled through John's communicator, a voice he recognized all too well. "This is Hunter Corps. I know you're out there, Kara. There's nowhere to run. You're coming with me. We'll take you alive or dead. It makes no difference." John's grip tightened on his weapon. Corps was one of the most feared bounty hunters in the galaxy, known for his ruthless efficiency and cold demeanor. He didn't negotiate. He didn't show mercy. If Kara was caught, they would stop at nothing to extract what they needed from her. John had to act, and he had to act fast. "We need to move," he said, urgency in his voice. "We can't fight them head-on." Kara looked up at him, her expression grim. "There is another way, but it will require everything from me." "What do you mean?" John asked, his voice rising in confusion. "There's a signal, an emergency beacon embedded within the device," Kara explained, her fingers trembling as she clutched it. "It will alert my people, but activating it will reveal our position to Corps and his team. They will know exactly where we are." John's mind raced. He had to weigh the risks. On one hand, the beacon could bring help. Kara's people could arrive and potentially turn the tide. But on the other hand, it could be a death sentence if Corps and his hunters got to them first. "They'll come," Kara continued, her voice steady, though her eyes flickered with doubt. "But it's a gamble. I'm not sure we'll survive long enough." John glanced at the approaching hunters. They were closing in, their forms now unmistakably visible as they navigated through the underbrush. The Hunter Corps led them, his imposing figure towering above the others. His armor was matte black, his face obscured by a helmet, but his eyes, John could feel them even from this distance. Cold. Calculating. Ready to end this hunt. "Kara," John said, his voice steady despite the rising tension. "We're doing it. We don't have a choice." She nodded, and without another word, she pressed the device to her chest. The glow intensified, and the hum of energy filled the air as it activated. John braced himself as the signal cut through the forest, and he could feel the weight of their decision settle over him. The beacon was sent. Their position was now known. For a brief moment, there was silence. Then, the hunters reacted. Cor's voice rang out through the trees, amplified by a speaker. "You should have surrendered, Kara. It's over." The ground vibrated as the hunter's vehicle revved up, and the trees seemed to bend under the weight of the approaching force. John's eyes flickered toward Kara, whose gaze had hardened. She was ready. Ready for whatever came next. "I'll protect you," John promised, though part of him knew he was lying. There was no way he could take on Corps and his team alone. But he had to buy time. Time for the beacon to reach her people. Time for a miracle to happen. Kara's eyes softened. "I know," she whispered. "But you must promise me something." John raised an eyebrow, looking down at her in surprise. "What?" "If I fall," she said quietly, "do not let them take me. Do not let them use me." John felt a lump form in his throat, but he swallowed it down. He didn't want to think about that possibility. He wasn't going to let it happen. Not if he could help it. "I promise," he said firmly, the weight of her words hanging in the air between them. A faint sound echoed in the distance, a signal of the approaching hunters. They were almost here. The moment had come. Kara stood with John's help, her legs shaky but determined. She moved toward the edge of the clearing, stepping into the shadows where the hunters' lights couldn't reach. John followed, his hand on her arm, his eyes scanning the terrain for any signs of movement. The vehicle's engines roared louder, and Cora's voice boomed again. "You're out of time, Kara. You can't run forever." John tightened his grip on his weapon and turned toward Kara. "Stay close. We're going to fight this." She nodded, her face set in determination. Together. As the hunters closed in, John felt something stir inside him. A sense of purpose he hadn't known in years. He wasn't just running anymore. They weren't just survivors. They were a team. And they were going to fight, no matter what. A dangerous revelation. The forest had become a labyrinth of shadows, a place where the line between safety and danger blurred into a constant sense of unease. John could feel it in his bones. The closer the hunters came, the tighter the air seemed to press down on them. The distant sound of their engines reverberated through the trees, a constant reminder that they weren't safe. But for now, they had managed to stay out of sight, crouched in the darkened edges of the clearing, where the trees formed a natural barrier. Kara stood beside him, her body trembling with exhaustion, but her face was resolute. The device she carried pulsed faintly, casting a soft, eerie glow in the darkness. Every few moments, she would glance at it, her expression unreadable. There was something about the way she held it, something almost protective. "Are you sure this is the right call?" John asked, his voice barely more than a whisper. His eyes flicked from her to the flickering light of the hunter's search vehicle in the distance. Kara nodded slowly. "I don't have a choice. This device is not just a beacon. It's the key to an emergency retrieval system. When it activates, my people are alerted, and they will come for us. They'll get to us faster than the hunters will. But," she hesitated, her gaze darkening, "they'll know exactly where we are, too. My enemies will stop at nothing to prevent this from happening." John felt his stomach tighten. The implications of what Kara was saying were impossible to ignore. If this device could alert her people, it meant they weren't just dealing with a handful of bounty hunters. They were up against an entire network of forces who would do anything to capture Kara and keep whatever secrets she was carrying. "Your people, are they really the ones we're waiting for?" John asked, his eyes narrowing. "Are they really going to help us?" Kara's eyes softened, though there was a sadness in them that John couldn't ignore. "You don't understand," she murmured. "It's not just about saving me. It's about saving everyone." John was about to ask her what she meant when the sound of crunching leaves interrupted him. His body went tense, his hand instinctively reaching for his weapon. Kara's hand shot out to stop him, her eyes wide with urgency. "Don't," she whispered. "It's not them. Not yet." John held his breath, his mind racing. Then, through the shadows, a figure emerged. It was a man, dressed in a nondescript uniform, a patch across his chest denoting some kind of affiliation John didn't recognize. He was tall, his face hidden by a hood, but his posture was confident, almost casual. For a moment, John thought it might be a mercenary sent to finish the job. His instincts screamed to fight, but Kara's voice stopped him. "It's him," she said softly, a flicker of recognition in her voice. John didn't understand, but he didn't have time to ask questions. The man stepped forward slowly, his eyes darting between them, clearly assessing the situation. "I see you activated the signal," he said, his voice low but steady. "And I see you're still alive, Kara." Kara took a sharp breath, her body stiffening. "You?" she began, her voice filled with disbelief. "How are you here?" The man took another step closer, his expression darkening. "I came to find you, and I came to warn you." He looked directly at John, his eyes narrowing. "But it's not just about you anymore. They know we're here, and if we don't move now, it's over for all of us." John's head was spinning. What was going on? Who was this man? And why did Kara seem so surprised to see him? His grip tightened on his pistol, though he wasn't sure whether to use it or not. Kara seemed to sense his confusion. She looked at John, her eyes filled with a mixture of sorrow and determination. "This is Ashar," she said quietly. "He's one of my people, one of the few who survived the last attack. But what he's about to tell you will change everything." John's grip on the gun loosened, but his suspicion remained. "What attack? What are you talking about?" Ashar's gaze hardened, and he stepped forward, lowering his voice as though they were being watched. "You've seen the hunters. You've felt the tension in the air. But what you don't know, what you couldn't possibly understand, is that this is no longer just a bounty hunt. It's the beginning of something much bigger. And Kara, she is at the center of it." John felt a chill run down his spine. This wasn't just about bounty hunters. It wasn't about a simple chase anymore. Kara was involved in something far more dangerous, something that John had no idea how to deal with. Kara's expression darkened, and she glanced at the device in her hand. The device. "It's not just a beacon, John. It's a signal that's been embedded with something far more dangerous than any of us realized." Ashar nodded, his face grim. "This device contains a map to a secret location. The location that holds the key to a weapon so powerful it could change the fate of the entire galaxy." John's blood ran cold. "A weapon?" he whispered. Kara closed her eyes, her voice barely audible. "Yes, the weapon my people have kept hidden for centuries. If it falls into the wrong hands, it could destroy everything. The hunters know about it, and now others do too. There's no going back." John felt the weight of her words sink in. They were caught in the middle of something far beyond survival. The stakes had just gotten much higher. Ashar's voice cut through his thoughts. "We don't have much time. The hunters are closing in, and soon others will be here too. If we don't leave now, we're all dead. They won't just kill us. They'll take the device and unleash hell." John turned to Kara, his mind racing. "We can't let that happen. We have to stop them." Kara's eyes met his, her face filled with resolve. "I didn't want to drag you into this, John, but you're already in it. Whether you like it or not, we're in this together now, and we're going to finish it." John's heart pounded. They were no longer just running from hunters. They were running from an entire galaxy's worth of power-hungry enemies. The device was more than just a map. It was the key to a weapon that could change everything. And Kara, she wasn't just a pawn in this game. She was the player. And now he was in this game too. As the distant hum of engines grew louder, John took a deep breath, steadying himself for what was to come. They didn't have much time, but there was no turning back. They had to move now. Sacrifice and hope. The night felt heavy, pressing down on them as the faint glow of distant engines grew louder, steadily closing in. John stood in the shadows of the ruined structure, his muscles coiled like springs, ready for the inevitable confrontation. Beside him, Kara gripped the device with shaking hands, her face pale but determined. The weight of everything, the hunters, the weapon, the galaxy's fate, was now on her shoulders. The realization was stark. The moment they activated the device, everything had changed. They weren't just fighting to survive anymore. They were fighting to prevent the unthinkable from happening. The map to the weapon was a deadly secret, one that had been hidden for centuries by Kara's people. And now, the hunters, along with those who sought the power of the weapon, were closing in. They would stop at nothing to get it. Ashar stood a few feet away, his sharp eyes scanning the trees as if the forest itself might betray them. "We don't have much time. The others will be here soon, and Kor will make sure we don't get another chance." His voice was tense, every word weighed down by urgency. Kara's eyes, though filled with fear, were unyielding. "I know what we're facing, Ashar. I've known from the start. But this is the only way to stop them." She turned to John, her gaze locking onto his, pleading with him to understand. John looked at her, his heart heavy with the knowledge of how dangerous things had become. He had never imagined that his decision to help an injured alien woman would lead him here, to a fight that could tear apart everything he knew. But he couldn't walk away now. Not when the stakes were this high. Not when it was more than just their lives on the line. "We don't have a choice, do we?" he said softly, looking down at Kara, his voice tight with emotion. "No," she whispered, her voice barely audible in the wind. "We don't. But I won't let them use this device. Not like this." John nodded. He didn't fully understand the consequences of activating the device, but he knew that if it meant keeping it out of the wrong hands, he would stand by her. The galaxy, no, their future, depended on it. Ashar stepped forward, a grim expression on his face. "You're right, Kara, but we need to make a choice right now. If the hunters find us, we can't stop them. The device has to be activated, but if we're going to survive, we need to split up. I'll draw them away while you two get to the extraction point." Kara shook her head fiercely. "No, we stay together. I won't leave you." Ashar placed a hand on her shoulder, his voice low and filled with resignation. "You don't have a choice. If you don't get the device to your people, we all die. You're the key to everything now. I've made my peace with this. You must make yours." John watched the exchange in silence, understanding the weight of Ashar's words. He was right. As much as Kara wanted to fight, as much as they both wanted to stay together, it was clear that their survival depended on getting the device into the right hands. There was no room for hesitation. "Kara," John said, his voice steady. "He's right. We have to trust him." Her eyes searched his face, as though looking for a glimmer of doubt, but all she found was the same resolve that she had seen in him since the moment they met. Finally, she nodded. "All right, we go. But I won't forget this, Ashar." Ashar gave a small nod, turning toward the trees, his figure already blending into the shadows. "I'll hold them off for as long as I can. Don't make it be for nothing." With that, Ashar disappeared into the darkness, leaving John and Kara standing at the edge of the clearing, their future uncertain. Kara's breath was shaky as she turned back to John. "We need to go now. We're running out of time." John didn't hesitate. He grabbed Kara's hand, pulling her toward the dense underbrush, their footsteps muffled by the forest floor. Every movement was deliberate, quiet. They couldn't risk being heard. Every second counted. As they moved deeper into the forest, Kara's breathing grew more labored, the strain of their sprint taking its toll on her. John glanced at her, his concern mounting. "Kara, are you all right?" She nodded, though the pallor of her face said otherwise. "I'm fine. Just tired." John didn't believe her, but he kept running, forcing himself to push forward. They had to get to the extraction point. It was their only hope. The device they carried, the key to everything, had to reach Kara's people before Kor and his hunters got their hands on it. They couldn't let the weapon fall into the wrong hands. The sound of engines in the distance was a constant reminder that they weren't alone. Kor's forces were closing in, but the further they moved, the more they seemed to vanish into the night. The dense trees provided cover, but it wasn't enough to stop the feeling of being hunted. After what felt like hours, the ground beneath them began to slope upward, and the trees thinned. The sounds of the pursuit were still there, but distant now. And ahead, John saw the faint outline of a landing pad, an old forgotten station that Kara's people had used for emergencies. They had made it. But as John stepped forward, ready to call out to whoever might be waiting for them. The ground shook beneath their feet. A high-pitched, mechanical whine filled the air. The unmistakable hum of Kor's vehicle. It was coming, and it was close. Kara turned to John, her eyes filled with fear. They're here. It's too late. John knew what had to be done. There was no time to run anymore. No time to hide. He looked at her one last time. I won't let them take you. I promise. And in that moment, he knew what he had to do. They had to activate the device. It was the only way to ensure that Kara's people would come, no matter the cost. He pulled the device from Kara's hands, his fingers trembling as he pressed the activation sequence. The world around them seemed to still, and for a moment, the glow of the device illuminated everything around them, a beacon of hope in the darkness. As the light flared, John heard the sound of engines roaring behind them. He turned, just in time to see Kor's vehicle descending from the sky. The hunters were here. But it didn't matter. Kara's people would come now. They had to. In the final moments, Kara's voice broke through the chaos. John, no. The device pulsed one last time, and the sky above them cracked open, a flash of light signaling the arrival of her people. And then, as the shadows closed in, everything went white.